What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the What is the Bible series here with Virginia Wingard. My name is Sarah Kate, and we're doing another deep dive today. I just had to. Last episode, we talked about Leviticus, and this episode, we're talking about Leviticus again. So let's dive in. Now, the reason I wanted to go over Leviticus one more time, and I don't know, maybe 2 more times, maybe 3 more times, is because we can't separate Leviticus from the rest of the Bible. All of the books of the Bible are meant to be read together. They're all important. Even though we don't subscribe to this system of sacrificial offerings today, it's important for us to understand why they're here. So we're going to dive deeper into Leviticus today and talk about this system. So the last episode, very briefly, I mentioned that one of the reasons why this sacrificial system was set up and why all these laws were given to the Israelites is because they were wandering around in the desert and God was providing them a sense of structure in their lives, okay? We're gonna go deeper than that today. Everything in Leviticus can be separated into either category A, the laws, and B, the sacrificial system. So let's dive into the laws. Chapters 1 through 4 of Leviticus are all about the types of offerings that you're going to be doing as atonement for your sins. So chapter 1, the burnt offering. Chapter 3, the fellowship offering, the sin offering. So it describes the way that you're supposed to give these offerings. We'll come back to that. We're going to go straight to chapter 5, okay? And we're going to talk about specifically the laws that we find in these chapters and what they are for, okay? Chapter 5, verse 1. When someone sins in any of these ways, I hope you're following along with me. Leviticus chapter 5, verse 1. When someone sins in any of these ways, if he has seen, heard, or known about something he has witnessed and did not respond to a public call to testify, he will, if someone touches anything unclean, if he touches human uncleanness, if he swears rashly. I'm just skimming through chapter 5 here. It lists all these different sins. At the end, it talks about the offering that you should give for atonement for this sin. At the very basic level, underneath what all these laws mean, just in chapter 5, we can see that the basic here is to keep a preservation of the community, okay? Verse 2, touching anything unclean, preserving the community by maintaining a healthy community. Chapter 6 of Leviticus, someone sins and offends the Lord by deceiving his neighbor, lying, deceit against somebody. If somebody has stolen something, if somebody has sworn falsely against somebody, if somebody has taken something, okay? So you can I'm just skimming through chapter 6 here. All of these things were put in place. Don't do these things in order to preserve the community. These things are laws because they protect the community. When you start lying to your neighbor or stealing from your neighbor, you are causing discord in the community. We don't want discord in the community in the desert. Then it talks about the offerings you're going to provide because of that discord. We go back into the offerings in chapter 6, chapter 7. We get a little bit of a story in chapter 8. We're going over to chapter 11 now. This is kind of when we get back to the laws and the system of the laws. Chapter 11 is all about the dietary restrictions of the Hebrew people. Now, at its most basic level, we can see that dietary restrictions here are in place to preserve the health and safety of the community. And here's how. We see prohibitions against eating carnivorous birds and animals, birds like vultures and eagles and hawks. And one reason we can see why it would be helpful for them not to eat carnivorous birds is because these types of birds helps prevent undigestible toxins, as well as in this section talks about not eating certain types of fish, shellfish, that we know now carry a bunch of parasites. So yeah, it helps preserve the health of the community for them not to eat birds that could be toxic, have toxic meat or something toxic in them, for them not to eat shellfish that are known to carry parasites. That helps preserve the health of the community. There's also prohibitions here against eating the meat of an animal who has died naturally. And clearly this helps prevent them ingesting meat that could have spoiled. Preserve the health of the community. They talk about cleaning and curing and cooking the meat here in great detail. And the reason they're going into this so deeply is because it helps prevent bacteria growth, which helps prevent sickness. So, dietary laws. Here in chapter 11 of Leviticus, at its very basic level, these dietary laws help to preserve the health and well-being of this community because it keeps them away from things that could make them sick. Chapter 12 goes into childbirth. Okay, and there are a lot of laws about clean and unclean and sinning and not sinning when you're giving childbirth. And the very basic, at the bottom level of all of this, has to do with maintaining health in the community and providing the best chance possible for the mom and this baby to be as healthy as possible, which preserves the health and well-being of their community. One example of the intensity of the conditions here and the great detail that they go in for childbirth and separating the mom and the fact that she has to be away for a certain period of time is in the Jewish law. We know Jews are not allowed to work on the Sabbath, right? Well, to provide an example of how intense childbirth was early on, even if a woman were to begin giving birth on the Sabbath, it was still permitted that she call a midwife to work, because a midwife would be working then to help birth the child, even if it was on the Sabbath, since a woman in labor was considered to have a similar legal status as a sick person who is in mortal danger. So as a reminder, Jews can't work on the Sabbath, can't do any work on the Sabbath unless somebody is in mortal danger. Let's go to chapter 13 of Leviticus. Everything in chapter 13, I think, almost everything, let me make sure, is about skin diseases, okay? Skin conditions, boils on the skin, and if you have white on your skin and it's deeper than the skin, or if the hair on the skin is white, and yada, 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 so on and so forth, scabs on the skin, then you have to go to a priest, and the priest has to help you out with their skin disease, and then you have to make a sacrifice because of your sin from having this skin disease. I think you're picking up what I'm putting down here. I think that maybe we're seeing a pattern of what's going on with these laws. Chapter 13 of Leviticus, if you get sick, we don't want other people to get sick. So go away until you're not sick, right? Preserve the community. Special note of chapter 14, we're talking about the cleansing of skin disease. And in chapter 14, verse 2, This is the law concerning the person afflicted with a skin disease on the day of his cleansing. He is to be brought to the priest, verse 3, who will go outside the camp and examine him. And that's just a great example of how we're removing you from the community because we want to preserve the community until you're better. Take him outside the camp, keep the community safe. Okay, we're going into chapter 15. And the heading of my chapter, you can read chapter 15 of Leviticus on your own. I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm not going to go into it, but my heading says bodily discharges. Quick reminder, God has made a promise to Abraham. Who remembers, okay? What is that promise? The promise to Abraham was to build a great nation through this lineage. And that wasn't so long ago from Moses. I think it goes Abraham, Isaac, Jacob / Israel, also known as Israel. Israel's 12 sons. One of those 12 sons is Levi. And then Levi is Moses and Aaron's dad, which means how many sections ago was that? Father, grandfather would be Israel. Great-grandfather, Isaac. Great-great-grandfather, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, Abraham. I'm only saying that to say the promise that God made to Abraham is not that many generations ago from Moses. It's very clear to them that they are on the journey to the promised land, the promised land, the land that God has promised. They're on a journey to Canaan here. And on that journey, they're remembering God has promised that he is going to make a great nation for us. God is trying to build a nation here. So let's not waste the building of that nation. You read Leviticus 15 and let me know what you think about that. We're going on to, we talk about, there's a little bit of story here in 16. And we're going to go on to, of course, 17, forbidden sacrifices. Preservation of the community. We're going to agree. We're not pagans. Chapter 18 of Leviticus, prohibited pagan practices. There's a lot to talk about, honestly, in chapter 18 of Leviticus. I'm not going to go deep into instruction here. If you want to talk about chapter 18 of Leviticus personally, I'd be glad to do that. Come and find me. There's a lot to talk about. I'm not going to go deep into it, but the main point here is to preserve the society. We want to make sure that everybody is on the same level and that we agree to these rules and that we're not causing discord within the community by doing all these other things, right? We're going to chapter 19, respect your mother and father, keep the Sabbath, don't turn to idols, don't make cast images of gods, don't strip your vineyard. I mean, these are basic rules and laws that help to provide for the community. Stick together as a community. Don't create problems with your community. Work together to create positive and uniform ties to the community. And by uniform here, I mean we're all in this together. Everyone is doing what we're doing. Chapter 21, the holiness of priests. Then we get into section where the priests kind of get instructions, and as a Hebrew people, you should be able to see that it's the priest's job to help you try and maintain all these rules. So clearly the book, we can see, has as basic form two different things. One, all the laws that we just went into, the laws against sin, okay? And then two, all the ways that you were supposed to give an offering, what kind of offering, where the offering was going to be, very specific instructions about this sacrificial system of offerings. The first section, the law, as I just went through, is working to keep this group of people safe and healthy and connected as a community of Hebrew people. At its most basic form, all these things are just to provide safety and well-being for this group of people. And then the second section here, since the law is not God, and since God is not the law, we have the law is only a part of God's relationship of restorative justice here. The second section is about how the community learns to interact with God on a we basis and a transformative basis. God seeks restoration with his people through rules because God seeks relationship. Okay, I'm going to put this system of sacrifice, I'm going to explain it in a different way with words that they would not use back then, but words that could help us understand this today, okay? So, the system of sacrifice in these chapters of Leviticus, and when I say system of sacrifice, I'm talking about instructions on kill the bull, kill the goat, kill the bird, take the bird and do this with it and put it on the altar, and all those things, okay? This system of sacrifice atoned for misdemeanors. That's our word, okay? You know what I mean when I say misdemeanors. Or unintentional sins. Not exactly the same thing as a misdemeanor, but for them, these were unintentional sins. Like having your period, having a skin rash, getting boils on your skin. I didn't mean to get boils on my skin, right? It atoned for these unintentional sins. But the system of sacrifice did not atone for intentional sins, felonies, okay? It did not atone for felonies. Things like murder, occult practice, committing adultery. In other words, you knew you were committing a sin when you murdered someone. You didn't accidentally murder someone in most cases. You didn't accidentally worship another god. You knew you were worshiping another god when you did that. It didn't atone for these intentional sins. Now, okay, here we go. Ready? The purpose of the sacrifice was not just to have this system of penalties and fees or to rate and grade sins so that your biggest sin required the biggest animal sacrificed and your smallest sin required the small, and to order them like that. That was not the purpose of the sacrifice. The purpose of the sacrifice in Leviticus was to maintain your relationship with God and repair that relationship if it got broken as a result of your sin. Let me say that again. The purpose of the Levitical system of sacrifice was to maintain your relationship with God and repair that relationship if it got broken. The sacrificial system in Leviticus is all about obedience and reconciliation. So let's put this into an example, okay? Let's say I get a skin rash, all right? I, in biblical era, don't have modern science to help me understand that this skin rash is not a result of my sin. It's a result of, I don't know, acne, sunburn. And so this skin rash, even though we know now today this is not true, is a result of my being human and far away from God because I have sinned. And so because of this skin rash, I'm going to take a goat from my herd, a male goat from my herd, and I'm going to take it to the priest, and I'm going to offer that goat up as a sacrifice to atone for my sin and to maintain my relationship with my holy God. Guess what? If my neighbor, and this is the great thing about the sacrificial system, if my neighbor Joe, 2 months from now, gets a skin rash, he's going to take a goat. He's going to go to our movable sanctuary. He's going to offer that goat as a sacrifice to atone for his sin in the same way that I did. Everybody who has a skin rash has to do the exact same thing. And because the Hebrews are a community together using sacrificial systems, they can view these sacrifices, the sacrifices that they make in their sanctuaries, right? Put that into perspective. All of these sacrifices are being made at the altar of their sanctuary, their movable tent sanctuary. We as a Hebrew people can view these sacrifices as a form of worship and blessing. And when we understand that the Hebrew people are using sacrifice in their sanctuary at the altar as a form of worship and blessing, I hope that just opened Leviticus wide open for you, because it did for me. So if an Israelite, if a Hebrew person sinned unintentionally and developed a skin rash, they could turn to this very specific, so helpfully laid out in great detail system of sacrifice here in Leviticus. And they could use it to be reconciled with God in the exact same way that you and I can turn to Jesus and his ultimate sacrifice whenever we sin to be reconciled with God. The sacrifice in Leviticus is providing grace to the Hebrew people. So I really hope that this has helped. I think at the basic level, when we look at Leviticus in two ways, we can separate it into these laws. And when we look at the basic form of all of these laws, we can see how they're just trying to preserve the health and the well-being of this community of people. And then if we look at the second part of this book, is all about that system of sacrifice. One other thing, okay, I want to go into a little bit of detail about the burnt offering here. The burnt offering also does something to the community here, to the community of Hebrew people. And so let's remember, the burnt offering happens at the sanctuary, at what they would call the tabernacle, and the priest helps out with this offering. No matter what, if nobody in the tribe or camps or any of the Israelites sinned, there were always two burnt offerings. There was always a goat in the morning and there was always a goat in the evening. But also, and this is in Leviticus chapter 6, starting at verse 12, says this: "The fire on the altar is to be kept burning, and it must not go out. Every morning the priest will burn wood on the fire. He is to arrange the burnt offering on the fire and burn the fat portions from the fellowship offerings on it. Fire must be kept burning on the altar continually. It must not go out." So, yes, this system of sacrifice helps provide atonement. But the fact that there is an altar in the middle of the camp of Israelites that never goes out, this does something else for the Hebrew people. It provides a sense of continual God presence. It allows the Hebrew people to see that God is with them always. And that if we need to take our sacrifice to him, he is there. And that's a big deal. I want to go lastly, this is just chapter 1 of Leviticus. I did a little bit of a deep dive here, and I'm just going to point out a little bit, just a small amount of things. There is always something more that you can get from a book in the Bible. And the reasoning I want to point some of this out is because at first glance, chapter 1 of Leviticus is about the burnt offering, and maybe we have no reason to care about a burnt offering, but that's why I want to deep dive here. Verse 3 says this. This is just chapter 1 of Leviticus. Verse 3. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he is to bring an unblemished male. So first of all, burnt offering in general. Burnt offering represents a total sacrifice. You're not going to get any of this back. The animal that you bring as your burnt offering is gone. Okay? It's a total sacrifice. Let's move on. It says, from the herd. This is not an animal that you found in the woods. This is not an animal that you fought, that you caught and you don't own it. This is an animal from your herd. This is an animal you own. This means that this sacrifice costs you something. Okay? It has to cost you something. And then also it says he is to bring an unblemished male. This is only verse 3, okay? Only verse 3, unblemished male. Meaning don't offer up an animal that is already of no use to you. Don't offer God a blind animal, a maimed animal that you already have no use for. Giving God an animal that you don't need is not a sacrifice. Verse 4 says this. He is to lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering so it can be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. Okay? Whoever's sinning, the guy who's sinning, lays his hand on the head of the burnt offering. And this is to identify with the sacrifice. This is my sacrifice. I sacrifice this animal to seek atonement for my sins. It is not enough in the same exact way for us. It is not enough to know that Jesus died for the sins of the world. It's not enough to just know that. We have to identify with that belief. As a disciple, you have to identify with the belief that God died for your sins. And in the same way, you identify with the animal you are sacrificing in order to identify with that atonement, in order to receive that atonement. Later on, still in chapter 1 of Leviticus, instructions for 3 things are provided for the burnt offering. A bull, a goat or sheep, and several different birds. Okay, the fact that God accepts a bull, a goat, a sheep, a turtle dove, or a pigeon is an example that we see that God provides access to atonement for all people, regardless of how rich or poor you are, regardless of what you own. You can be forgiven for your sins because God will take a bull and he will also take a pigeon. And it matters not how rich you are or how poor you are. You can make that sacrifice. He goes even further. If you're very, very poor and you don't even own a pigeon, you can make a grain sacrifice. Okay, so equal opportunity here to come to the altar of God. So sacrifice in general, verse 4, the word atonement in verse 4 in Hebrew, kofar, meaning to cover. And so the idea of the burnt offering takes 4 shapes here. A, it's something that you need. You needed this animal. It's valuable to you. B, it asks you, the burnt offering asks you to be a participant in the sacrifice. C, it provides these steps that are from God to negate this idea that you could figure out how to cover your sin on your own. God is giving us the provisions and the instructions here. These are from God. And D, it provides tangible atonement for your sins in a world where Jesus had not yet appeared. You could go to the altar of the Lord and you could sacrifice a goat for your sins. As being a human, you're sinful. You could sacrifice a goat for your sins and receive forgiveness from God. And everybody could do that. Everybody could do that. So, you know, the more I get into Leviticus, the more blown away I am of the opportunity that God creates for his people, the Hebrew people, prior to Jesus. So I hope that has helped you with your understanding of Leviticus. I definitely got more out of my reading of Leviticus through this series. Next week, I think we're going to go on to Numbers, and we'll learn more about laws and Numbers as well. If you like this series, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Be sure to follow us on our YouTube channel here at Virginia Wingard, and we will continue with our series, What is the Bible, next week. So thanks for tuning in. Have a great week.